In this video, I want to talk about one of the architectural concepts that I've been thinking about for a while for the Blue Standard. And this is something I kind of subconsciously started implementing in my own projects, but now I want to standardize it with some contracts and some APIs in the future. So usually most of the API requests we're going to make are to models. And for that, we've got view model. There we go. So usually we're doing stuff like create, update, delete, your classic sort of CRUD operations, and that's how we do it. However, one thing that I've started to notice is this, well, you've probably noticed this as well for a long time, some things don't fit this paradigm. So sometimes you're not just creating a model on the back end, sometimes you're triggering a job that needs to go off. Or sometimes you need to actually create multiple different models in some really unique ways. So for example, maybe you've got a sign up form, and when you first create the user for that sign up form, they're also entering a whole bunch of other information. I actually have this problem right now where we've got basically a stepper for registration. And what we could do is use view model to, for example, create the user, and then to create the organization. That's another thing that we need to do. And another thing we're doing is creating some equipment for that organization. And basically, it just kind of goes on and on and on. And honestly, we could just do this using view model, where we could say, create the user, then create the organization and attach it to that user, then create the equipment. But then you kind of have to make sure that all your like one of the things we want to do, for example, is make sure that a user can only create one organization up front. And if they want more organizations for their account, then they need to call up and sort of, we organize that a little bit more manually, at least with this specific business use case. And so you can't just create a user unless you create some sort of a rule on the back end that says, create a user and then only create an organization if there isn't one already. But we also kind of want to make sure that when a user is created, a org is created at the same time. So we got sort of these unique use cases where view model doesn't quite cover what we need here anymore. And I'll give you another example. And another example where view model probably could kind of cover it, but also probably shouldn't. One of them is sending a bunch of text messages. So we've got this use case where we send notifications. So send all notifications. And I don't want to give away too much of what this business actually does, but basically it sends notifications for pricing. So we've got some pricings for some things, and all of those pricings are set up. And then once they're set up, somebody presses a button and notifications are sent for each of those pricings. So that might end up sending off, 30, 100, 300 notifications, which are either emails or text messages. And what you could do is you could just create a notification for each one, or maybe have like a bulk. One thing we're going to add to view model soon is bulk operations. So you could do like a bulk create notifications. The only problem with this sort of thing is it gets a little bit messy and it gets a little bit risky, because if you send off if you're sending off like 30 or 50 or 60 different requests for creating a notification, something might go wrong along the way. And then there's other things like being able to just trigger jobs. So maybe you want to trigger a job. And again, you could do this with view model and say, for example, create a job. And then when that job is created, then it automatically triggers something on the back end. So maybe we'll do like a little line here and then say here that it triggers an event. And so on your backend, if you're using Laravel or whatever you're using on your backend, you might say, hey, when this create job resource is created, automatically trigger an event for that job. And honestly, actually, this is probably a good idea now that I think about it, because then creating the job, it just makes it really easy to then create that job and then do some listening for things like you might have like the status of that job. And then, when you create that job, you might have the name of the job, which is could be an enum of all of the jobs in your system. And then when that job is created, it then triggers things like changes in the status. Man, now that I think about it, this is a great idea. We should make this a pattern. If you want to run a job, just create a job. I bet you people are already doing this. Okay, but anyway, for any things that don't fit into the view model paradigm, such as the sending of notifications, where you might have to do a whole bunch of other little things. And for example, this kind of register form where you want to do a whole bunch of creates all at once. For that, we have this other concept, which I'm going to be calling actions. I used to call it services, but I don't think services is a very good name for it, because to me, a service is, for example, YouTube, the YouTube API. You know, a service is, I tend to think of it as an API that's added on the back end. So I used to call it services, but now I'm calling it actions. And this is basically going to look like this. Actions are going to be scoped. For now, it's only going to be one layer deep, but maybe in the future we could add more layers. And it would be something like this. You might organize it by models, but you also might not organize it by models. So you might have, for example, /user/change-password. All right, so it follows this paradigm of, and I should actually add that up here, namespace. And then on the right side of that, you've got the name of that action. So maybe we'll call this like action name, or maybe even just name at this point. So user is the namespace, change password is the action. It's the thing that we're going to do. And by the way, actions is actually something that it's a common pattern that you'll often see in backends. I haven't seen it in front ends before. It probably is done on front ends as well. Where basically you have a piece of code which runs that thing that you want to do, for example, changing a password, and you decouple the action itself from things like your controller or your command. So often what you'll do, so I'm now talking about at a backend level here, you might have an action which is change password action, and how that gets triggered doesn't matter. So this action is agnostic to how it gets triggered. So for example, it might get triggered by a controller, or maybe I should write in here parentheses route. You could probably even get rid of controller at this point. And you could say, hey, when you hit this route, and that might be, for example, let's actually use our example here, namespace, so user/change password. When you hit that route, then I want you to run this action. But then, because the action itself is decoupled, you could also say, hey, when I run this command. So you might have a command called user:change-password. And then you might send some parameters in there for the password, and that gets sent through to the change password action. And there's other ways you could run it as well. So maybe you just want to run it somewhere in your code. So maybe you're just running it, and you might say, for example, I can't even actually remember how this is done. I think it's like change password and then Laravel, but it doesn't matter what backend you're using. This concept can work in any backend. And you might say change password run, and that's how you can actually run the action directly. Or another one you could have is dispatch, or maybe we'll even say job here. So then, again, I can't remember the exact syntax for Laravel, but it doesn't matter. Then you could say dispatch, and then that basically runs change password inside of a job. So now we've got this change password action, and it's decoupled from all the different ways that it could be run. So that's just kind of an aside I wanted to add on to this concept, because that's something else I want to put into the Blue Standard. We actually use a library for this. It's called Laravel Actions. Laravel Actions, yeah, here it is. And so this is a really cool library where you've got these different ways that you can run those actions. So you can run it, I don't even know about this, as an object. You can run it as a controller, as a job. Look at that, you can do it as a listener, a command, and even as a fake, so it's easy to test as well, which is kind of cool. So the point being, now we've got this concept of an action. And the idea is, I'm hoping, and I think this is true, that we can have only two essentially paradigms for our API. One of them is view model. So one of them is working with models in a predictable way. And then anything that doesn't fit that model paradigm. And by the way, we can build on this model paradigm in the future. We can do batch operations in the future. Maybe in the future, we can even do, what's the difference? There's another one, it's similar to batch, but they use a different word for it. But basically, you can do things where you create a whole bunch of different models in one request. So you might say, for example, in this one request, I want you to create this user, and then I want you to create this organization for that user, and then I want you to create all this equipment for this user, and then I want you to attach all this stuff to the organization, blah, blah, blah. So there's things we could do in the future where we can actually do more in one request, kind of like GraphQL. And in fact, GraphQL could eventually be an implementation for view model, and we might be able to do, with one consistent API, support GraphQL on the back end and support Laravel and some of these other APIs on the back end. But anyway, the idea is we can keep extending on this view model concept, but then the things that don't fit it, we can then use actions. And now I'll show you what actions are actually going to look like from a view point of view. So you've seen what it looks like on the back end now. So if we were using view, right, let me just sort of connect some of these concepts. If we were using view, it would essentially hit an endpoint on the back end that then runs the action. And the way we're building this is going to be agnostic. So it's just like view model. We want to be able to say, hey, this is how we handle actions. It's going to be the exact same for Supabase as well. So if you're using Supabase, you would then have to decide on a standardized way to run actions on your backend. And if you were using some other node library like Fastify or Strapi or whatever, you would have to standardize how you do actions on the backend. And this is great because everybody's writing the same code now. And it means that somebody who is on one of our Laravel projects on the front end is going to understand how we do one of our, for example, Microsoft projects or Strapi projects or Supabase projects. In reality, we'd only be doing Laravel, maybe Supabase and Microsoft projects if you were on my team. But essentially, we want to open this up so other people can take this concept and bring it to their backend as well. So let me show you what it'll actually look like now. I think we've got this code thing, which works really well. There it is, code block. I love this about Miro. And now I can just kind of like make it a bit bigger so you can see it all right. So what is an action going to look like? Well, first you'll have a class. So we'll have a place where we can put all of our classes for the action. So a class might look something like this. If I can remember the syntax, it might be like export class, and then we'll call it something like change password. And maybe we'd put the word action on the end. Maybe not, because the place it's imported from would already have the word action. So it might be like, actions/change password is when you import it. Yeah. So then we'd say that extends action. And now what we can do is we can say the name of the action. And from memory, I can't actually use the word name here. So I think it has to be like action name. I haven't decided on what this is going to be called yet. Or ID even, an identifier for that action. So it's not an ID like you're probably used to that word being, which is something like this. This would actually be something like change password. Because the ID just means unique, an identifier. So how do we identify this action? With the string change password. And now that's not necessarily going to be on a URL. So in this case, it's sitting at the end of a URL, namespace. Maybe we should put namespace in there as well. I haven't actually thought about that. So maybe you would also have namespace in here. Here we go. I'm thinking this through on the fly. So maybe you enforce that they all need to have namespaces. Yeah, I think that actually would be a good idea. And then if you really could not think of a namespace, or maybe you've got a root level namespace, so you can have that as empty. You can not include the namespace, and then that would just do, depending on what you're using. In this case, it would just send /name, but then you would decide on how to do that based on, your implementation of actions. Yeah, okay. So we could say namespace, user, the ID of the action, change password, but then you also want to have a payload as well. And let me just see if I can remember how to do this. I wrote it in here recently. Here we go. We got the blue standard ecosystem here. And one of the things, I did this recently. Here we go, view actions. I wrote up a whole thing on how it's going to work. Yeah, then you would use declare. All right, so something like this. So this is TypeScript stuff now. So I think I can come in here and say, hey, this is TypeScript. Yeah, there we go. Response. So I want the response to look like this. All right. For example, success. And that's going to be a Boolean. And you can do the same with the payload as well now. We can say, hey, in the payload, I want to have the new password. And maybe you're also sending the old password. Haven't really thought this through. Man, even the tabbing is done nicely in this. Myro's done an amazing job on this. Old password. That might be a string. Yeah, you get the idea. And so this is how you would define your action. You may or may not include a payload, and you would probably also always include a response. And response isn't necessarily a response. In fact, I should probably call this something different, like return value. I don't know. But basically, this is what we get back from that action. And again, remember, this might not be coming from an API. This might actually be, an action could technically be just some code that gets run on the front end. And you might have different implementations for actions. So just like how View Model can have multiple implementations, so you could be running Supabase and Laravel at the same time, actions can have multiple implementations. So you might have an action that runs something like changing a password, or you might have an action that does something on the user's computer. Like you might have a create file action, and your implementation for that could be, so let's just say we got a Laravel implementation. We might also have I think they're called service workers. Yeah, actions that are actually service workers. And the API would look the exact same for running an action through Laravel and running an action through a service worker. But you would have different implementations. And then when you actually use it, you would say, hey, run this action and run it using the service worker. So that's kind of cool. All right, so that's what it looks like to actually set it up. Let me just steal some code here for running this action. Let me just see if that all looks good. And I might make this a little wider. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so now we can say on the front end, and keep in mind, this would be in a different file. So just like how you keep all your models in a separate file, you'd keep all of your actions in a separate file. And now we can start saying, hey, we got this change password action, and that's equal to use action, change password action. Simple as that. You just pass the class through like this, and then all of the typing just works. And I've tested this. We can get it working with beautiful typing. And then the response would be change password action run, and then you can enter in your new password, and that would actually throw me an error because here I've said in the payload I expect there to be an old password as well. So then you'd send through the old password as well. And behind the scenes, this would be using a maybe ref or getter. And the cool thing about that, so I think what I'd do is I'd automatically wrap this in a maybe ref or getter. I'm not sure exactly what that would look like. And then kind of retype it so that when we run here, you can send it through raw like this, or you could have, for example, const change password payload, whatever we call that. And that could be a ref. And then inside of the ref, we could have an object like this. And then we can basically just model that and then just send the ref directly down like this. And it still gets beautifully typed. Or we could do something like this where we could say new password. This is how you might actually want to do it. And then you've got, man, you can even do Control C, Control V, and it pastes down. Nice. Then we could do old password. And since this can be a getter, the payload has to be an object. So you would do it like this. You'd send through a function like that, and then you would return new password, which is new password.value. Yeah, and you could write it like that now. So you get that flexibility of the API, and we've minimized the work as much as possible up front. So this is all you have to do to define your action, literally just the things that you would have, that would make sense for you to have to define anyway. And then when you've defined all of that, you can just use your action like this. And this is and then you can imagine you would have it, inside of your, you might have like a Q dash button like this. And we could say, hey, loading is equal to change password action dot running dot value, whatever we end up calling that. And then, hey, when you click on this, I want you to say change password action dot run. So all those beautiful concepts that we've had before are also going to work here as well. Now, this is where it gets really exciting though. One of the cool things about the Blue standard is we can now use schema.blue to automatically generate all of our models. So I don't know how much I've shown people of this before, so I'll quickly just open this up. Hopefully I'm already logged in. So this is a website that I'm currently working on, which basically allows you to create a project, and then you can create all of your models for that project, and you can define what they all look like as well. So you can do all of your, you can define your relationships and all of your fields. And basically, we've got a CLI tool that keeps all of this in sync. So live, it keeps this in sync with your project. So when I make changes here in my project, all of my models are automatically being generated for me. All of my folder structures, they're automatically being generated for me based on what I've got inside of here. It's really, really cool. And so now that we've got a foundation for this setup, I want to do the same thing for actions. So rather than just having modules, we would also have a section here. So maybe I'd break this like we'd have a tab at the top here, one that says modules, and then here's all our modules, and then another section that says actions. And then in the actions, we can define inside of this tool what all of our actions look like. And then that means that this part here would automatically be generated for us. And the cool thing about that is if we can automatically generate our actions here, then we can also automatically generate our actions on the back end as well. So we define, using a JSON schema, we define what our actions look like, right? Using a tool like this. And then to the best of our ability, we can just start generating, hey, this is how that action looks on the front end. And then this is how that action looks on the back end. And this is kind of I think the word is isomorphic here. Maybe it's not at this point because the code technically isn't the same. But this is the sort of dream I've always seen web developers have. And this is why often people want to use Node on the back end so that their front end code can be the same as their back end code. But I've found personally that just doesn't work very well. Just shit always goes wrong, and there's always slight differences. And so what I prefer to do, and this dream that I've been chasing, is that we define everything up front with a schema, right? Using a tool like this. And at the end of the day, all this does is it gives you a schema. This is what the schema looks like, right? For all of our modules, we get schemas like this that are completely agnostic to your tooling. They don't care what you're using for the front end or back end. All it's doing is saying, this is what I expect everything to look like. And we can do the same thing here with actions then. We can say, this is exactly what I expect the action to look like, and then use it and then generate everything based on that. And then we'll have tooling as well in the future that says, hey, if there's something else that you end up needing to add here, we're going to make it so that we can say, hey, by the way, here are some other things that you can merge into the schema, and then you could just write some raw code. So For example, in that schema here, you might have something that says like Laravel specifics. You might have like a Laravel object inside of there. And then any of your Laravel specific stuff would sit inside of that object. And it might even have things like raw code. So basically it's that concept of making sure you can always tap out. Oh, my dogs are going off. So anyway, I hope all of that makes sense. This is kind of the dream that I've been working towards. And yeah, I'll see you in a future video. And I can't wait to actually get this built. It's really exciting. This stuff's now coming together for View Model. I can't wait to start getting it to come together for Actions as well. It's going to be, yeah, it's going to be a dream. All right, my dogs are going off. I think I've got some mail coming. I bought this really cool thing online where you can basically put your phone in there and say, hey, don't let me open my phone for the next 2 hours. So you put your phone in this box. It locks the box for 2 hours and you can't get it out until 2 hours later. So then I can stop myself from going on social media and stuff and just get work done. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this one and I'll see you in the next video.